Before we jump into the tactica of this Battletech vlog, I want to offer some framework. One of the ways, certainly not the only way to approach this idea, but it's a question of if we're doing this wargaming thing, and in this case, it's manifesting by the tabletop glory of Battletech, what kind of game do you want to play? What kind of narrative do you want to set up? What I mean by that is we're stepping out of space and time here, doing this wargaming thing, taking, I would argue, time well spent, but we all have other responsibilities, school, family, work, and we're sitting down for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to play a game. We want it to be a good game. We want it to be an entertaining game. I want something, I'm going to do my best to win, but I want something just otherworldly, something unique, something cool, something interesting, something tabletop glory to happen in that game so we can create that bond. We can create those memories, games that we will talk about years from now. Now, there's also competitive games where you're going in to play a tournament and the rules are laid out and you're going to utilize those rules to give you the greatest advantage and minimize the effects of the dice. It comes down to the type of game that you want to play. I say that because now within that framework, we're going to jump into this idea of stress points in the rules. And I'm going to be focusing in on one of them in Battletech from the perspective of this idea that the rules of any war game, they're a simulation. They're trying to take an idea, they're trying to take a narrative, and they're trying to put that into a wargaming experience, something that we can play back and forth. And certainly it doesn't account for everything. I mean, I can do a lot with a mech, but there's a lot of things that I can't do. But if we're talking about a role-playing game or in one of the novels, things that I would normally be able to do. Well, to have that complete freedom in a war game, in a tabletop game, then it becomes a role-playing game. You need a game master or someone to interpret the rules. It's vastly, vastly different. So there is going to be a limitation, and that's not a bad thing, with a wargaming rule set. Now, because of that limitation, and I've explored this idea to other rule sets, I've pushed up to the Wargaming Tactics playlist on the channel here, stress points for other systems. And in this one, of course, we're going to look at Battletech. When we look at Battletech in the rules, there are certain points where they get a little clunky. They start to slow down and they begin to possibly, I say possibly because it's not handed to you. You have to have the tactica to be able to use it. It starts to break down. It starts to get a little clunky and it produces results that perhaps were not intended. They weren't intended, but they're a product of the rules. And again, this is not to criticize the rule set. This type of stress point exists in every wargaming system to one extent or another. Now, if you're a competitive player and you're playing in a tournament, and these are legal tactics, we're not bending the rules, we're not rules lawyering them, we're not looking at them and twisting them and pulling obscure stuff out. Like, no, these are the rules as written. This is the flow chart. This is how it works. But we're putting a little bit of stress on it. If you're playing in a tournament, you might want to utilize this. You might want to use it to your advantage. If you're playing a narrative game, you know, maybe I really don't want to use this as much because it's going to be a little bit beardy and it's not really going to be a fun game to play. Going back to that framework at the beginning of this vlog, you should be aware of it because if I'm aware of this stress point and I play Battletech or another wargaming system with another person and they bring a certain type of list or lance to the table, then look, I'm aware of what you're trying to do. I'm aware of what's going on. So a lot of different ways to explore it. The first stress point in Battletech is the initiative system. Now, this is kind of a dynamic you go, I go, back and forth system. At the time, it was something a little bit different. This idea of how do you capture something, if it's not aided by AI at this point, which didn't even exist with Battletech, if it's not in kind of an app or some sort of dynamic thing, one of the things with the rule set for a wargaming system is trying to capture the real-time chaos of a battle. The fact that things are happening both sides at the same time. And early wargaming systems, it was very much you go, I go. I've got my army. I move my army. I move into position. I activate all my units. You just hang out and sit there and maybe come back in 30 minutes. And then after I move, I shoot everything at your army. And you just kind of sit there and take those losses. And then you get to go and move and shoot and magic or whatever the heck you're going to do from that perspective. As rule sets have evolved, we see interrupts where you go to move and I can use a command point or I can do something and stop you or activate a unit. We see firing that happens in different phases. We see more dynamic games. But Battletech at the time was one of the first rule sets where it tried to really account for both sides are trying to blast each other up. And both sides with these mechs and these tanks, it's happening at the same time. So what we see in the core rules is initiative. This idea of back and forth, we're going. So it's not just you move all your toys and I move mine. Depending on whether you win or lose initiative, you move a piece, I move a piece. You move a piece, I move a piece. And if the ratio is higher, maybe you move one piece and I move two pieces. So there's this back and forth trying to capture in the narrative, trying to capture in the rules that both sides are acting and reacting at the same time. Then when we get to the shooting phase, you see both of them happen at the same time. And even though you record damage and stuff, they both happen at the same time. So we declare targets and we fire and we do that. That's why the physical attacks and other potentially optional phases of the game happen last, because it's possible that at the same time, both of our mechs are blasting each other. You explode. I mean, you also hit me and damage me, but you explode, I take you out. You're not able to make those physical attacks. And we see that with Death and Above and a few other aspects of the game. But within that framework, focusing on initiative, where it begins to break down is if you overload the initiative system. Now, we're going to put aside house rules for a second. Certainly, some people will house rule this. Some people will make adjustments to it. And I don't want to discourage you from playing a horde-based list or different builds. I mean, myself, I play a lot of infantry, but I'm playing it with the idea of mechanized infantry and in support of my force. So I'm not doing it necessarily to abuse, but by that default, I do have a lot of initiative options. If you don't want to get caught, we're distilling Battletech down. I want to move certain pieces last. I want to move certain pieces to gain a tactical advantage. If we have two mechs toe to toe, I want you to move your mech first so I can see where you're going to go. Then I'm going to move my mech because maybe I can get side armor. Maybe if I'm fast enough, right, if it's a hunchback and I'm close in, I can get rear armor with that autocannon 20. Likewise, you want me to move first. You want me to move my hunchbacks, then you can figure out where you're going to go. You may still eat that AC-20 shot if we're really close, but it's not going to be rear armor. But if I have pieces that I can move ahead of you, lots of infantry stands, lots of light mechs, lots of cheap battle value, C-bill, tonnage, whatever you're going to use to calculate, in essence, I can tactically move my junk first and have my really heavy hitting team move secondary. And really, whether I win or lose initiative doesn't matter because I'm going to move this other stuff first. You're going to be moving your important things. And then when it comes around tactically for my important stuff to move, I'm going to be able to get the best advantage. So we see this stress point where Battletech was kind of designed around the idea of a lance. You've got 4 mechs, you've got 8 mechs. You might have a couple of vehicles. It was never really designed where I have 1 or 2 mechs and then I flood 30 tanks and 30 infantry stands. Although in the narrative, that's a legitimate force. I mean, you could have a mercenary company going rogue with a dropship, dropping in a Warhammer, a Marauder, a Shadowhawk, and say a Commando. And I'm defending my planet. It's a little bit backwater, but it's industrial. What do I have? I've got an urban mech, like maybe 10 or 15 Scorpion tanks because they're cheap. And then the rest are just rifle platoons that we've cooked up, gathered up, and sent them out. So technologically, that makes total sense, where I have this massive conventional armed force where you've got mechs. Well, in the rules narrative with initiative, I've got a lot to burn. Well, you only have X number of mechs. You've got your lance on that. So when we're designing, that's a stress point where you can deliberately try to overload the initiative phase with lots and lots of cheap stuff. It could be infantry. I could have infantry just hanging out somewhere, area denial, hanging back. I wouldn't take infantry just to have them sit there and burn the initiative, because tactically it is battle value. It needs to be out there earning. But I could take some infantry. I can take some hovers. I'm spacing on the name right now. Is it the Savannah Master? The hover vehicle that is essentially take an inner tube, put a lawn chair on it, a gasoline engine, and a medium laser. Like, that's it. I mean, it doesn't even have any armor. It's essentially a medium laser, or strap a rocket onto a medium laser, and there you go. That is the entire weapons platform. You can take like 10 or 15 of them. And there are some times where I've played Battletech ahead of time, and I played against some opponents ahead of time where we're like, you know what? Let's build a lulls list. Let's build something just crazy and see what happens. But we both go into that knowing what's going to happen. I want it is WYSIWYG. It is 1-for-1. You can play Battletech with proxies and tokens, but a friend of mine, we did play a game once, and I only needed to do it once because we kind of got it out of our system. He put down, I think, like 63 or 64 of these Savannah Masters, and we played it where we got like a little, it was a building that was like a train, or not Z-scale, slightly out of scale, so it was like a mech factory, but we said it was producing these Savannah Masters, and we had a whole parking lot full of them. So it's like my dropship went in, and it was supposed to be where it was abandoned, and we were going to grab these things to sell on the secondary market. I dropped my dropship in. There's a parking lot of like 60 plus of these things. The employees run out, or the factory workers run out from the plant because it's automated, get in these things and go against me. They smoked me. That was an insane amount of medium lasers. Not only was I getting killed on initiative, but I just rear armor on everything, and it quickly really cooked me. Now, would that happen in the actual narrative? An assault mech would probably tear through all of those. But rules as written with initiative and facing, you are at a significant disadvantage if someone deliberately loads on. If they deliberately say, look, I'm going to build my force just to overwhelm you from that perspective. But it goes back to, is this something you really want to do? And I'm not saying be that guy. You're going to be that guy. Is that how you want to play Battletech? If you are going to play that way, then there should be a good reason, mission-wise, you're going to do that. Or if you're going to play that way, it's a tournament or some other type of game pulling you in. But head-to-head, realize you're going to stress the rule points on there. Likewise, though, I wanted to put it out there because if you're a new Battletech player, you should be aware of it. So if someone does this to you, you kind of know what you're getting involved with, or you kind of know what's going on. I think a parallel would be when I had my Warhammer 40K army, I was playing Necrons, and it was kind of a themed Necron list. And someone random showed up to play at the club, and we sit down to play a game, and they're like, "Oh, I've been playing 40K that long. I'm kind of new to it," and they're pulling out their army. And we had agreed on a narrative game. We were going to set this up. We had like a cool Necron terrain. And they're pulling out, I've been playing 40K for a while, they're pulling out a completely meta army that is designed to exploit. It was a tournament-based army. And I'm looking at this and saying, I know exactly what you're pulling out. And they're like, no, it's just like a themed army. And, I've only been playing a couple of months. It's like, no, you haven't. There's no way. No, you haven't. I say that because you want to be aware of what you're going into. So this idea of stress points in the rule set for Battletech, the first one that we encounter is the initiative phase. Understanding how that works, understanding how that gets overloaded, and understanding if it does get overloaded, how do you begin to counter that? Just pushing it out there. Just putting it out there as the tactic and understanding how that goes. And again, this is just Battletech. There's 4 stress points in Battletech, and I love Battletech, but these stress points exist in different places in every single rule set that is out there for every single war game.